Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, it should come as no surprise that we need not look very far or search very hard to find greedy people in America. We can just turn on the television or look at a newspaper and see movie stars, sports stars, corporate millionaires who flaunt their mansions, multiple sports cars, yachts, and other various super luxury items. Even some TV evangelists and pastors of mega churches have been caught living lives of extreme and excessive wealth. Sadly, greed is not just a problem of the super wealthy. Greed is obviously a sin of excess, yet Christians like you and me struggle with this sin all the time. And if you are thinking to yourself, "Well, I'm not that greedy of a person," then I think you should reevaluate yourself a little more closely and maybe go back and read our call to confession. When we think about it, even poor people can be greedy. So why do we have this tendency to cling to our money and wealth and hang on to it for dear life? Giving into greed carries the dangers of attachment, anxiety, and self-centeredness. Jesus invites all of us as his followers to be rich toward God instead of clinging to our material possessions. Much like the excessive desires of lust or gluttony, greed quickly becomes an obsession for material gain. Some examples of this that play out in other forms of sin are stealing and hoarding, which both are examples of what greed may cause a person to do. Psalm 10 says, "For the wicked boast of the desires of their heart, those greedy for gain curse and renounce the Lord." Greed in this way is a form of idolatry because it shifts our main priority away from God and toward our material possessions. The problem with greed is that there is never an end to our greed once we get caught in the cycle. I find that iPhones can be a great example of this. For I have many friends who have great phones, but they always desire the latest and greatest technology. Even though they may have a perfectly good smartphone that works well, that they just bought 3, 4, maybe 6 months ago, but they'll be one of the first ones to get in line when the newest iPhone comes out, to wait and pay big bucks when they still have a perfectly good one that has almost the exact same features. Or, in other cases, someone who gets a lovely diamond necklace and then desires one with bigger diamonds or maybe even more precious stones. The problem of greed is that no matter what we do, it's never enough, because as soon as we have that first thing that we desired, then we are left wanting more or better. The Brother Grimm have a great fairy tale called The Fisherman and His Wife that illustrates insatiable greed at its worst. It goes like this. A poor fisherman is out fishing and catches a flounder. Yet this is no ordinary fish, for the flounder was once a prince and now has magical powers. The flounder explains who he is and asks and pleads with the fisherman that he be released. Never encountering a talking fish before, the man obliges. He returns home empty-handed, and his wife begins to ask why he's coming home empty-handed with no fish. The man tells a story about the encounter with the magical flounder, and she insists that he return to ask the fish for a favor, for she desires a cottage, and they live in a tiny, dirty shack. So the fisherman returns, and he summons the flounder. The prince fish grants the request of the man, and he returns home to find a beautiful cottage in place of their dirty old shack. His wife is very pleased by this, for it is a nice and lovely cottage, much better than what they had before. But by morning, she begins to question, well, if this magic fish could give me this nice cottage, why couldn't it give me a palace? So she demands that her husband march back down to the lake to request more of the fish. The man doesn't want to do it, but he goes down and he talks to the fish once again, and the fish grants the request for a palace. The man gets home and feels that surely this will be enough once he sees this enormous palace waiting for him. Yet, after she wakes up the next morning, again, she is not satisfied. She has decided that now she wants to be king. So once again, the fisherman hesitantly asked the flounder, and the wish was granted. And even this was not enough for her, for now she wanted to be emperor. Once again, the wish is granted, and it's still not enough. Even then, she desires more and wants to be the pope. After that wish was granted, I don't know why anyone would want to do that. Even then, she's not satisfied. And she decides that she would like to become like God. Her husband goes down to ask the fish, and then the wish is granted. And her palace, her abundant wealth, and all her power were transformed back into a dirty little shack. And they were never able to see the fish again. In this way, she got exactly what she had asked for, to become like God, which meant that she had to become humble and poor as Jesus was. The woman never had enough because her greed could not be satisfied. This is just like the rich man in the story with Lazarus and the rich man in the parable we just read, who gained so much just to lose it all, with nothing to show for it. This leads us to another one of the symptoms of greed, which is being anxious about our material security. Now, I'm pretty sure that most people here in this congregation are not guilty of extreme greed. And if you are, you're hiding it really well. Yet, most of us here today worry about our finances. And we worry about things like if we will be able to put our children through college, will we have enough saved up for retirement? Will we be able to do the few things we'd like to do for ourselves? The verses that follow our scripture today talk about how we need not worry about the things that are necessary for our lives. Instead, it asks that we focus fully on trusting and relying on God. The brother from the passage was looking to have his inheritance dispute settled by Jesus. And I believe that he was likely worried about paying some debt that he owed. Whether it was he had borrowed money from the Pharisees and scribes so that he could finish his studies, or maybe he decided to take out a line of credit with the tax collectors. I don't really know, but whatever was going on, it is certain that the brother in the passage is definitely anxious about his financial state. So Jesus takes and deflects his anxiety by telling the parable and having a warning about being greedy. And then he explains to this man and the rest of the crowd why we are not to worry about food and clothes and shelter. Anxiety about money is a normal stress that we have in our lives, but we need not let it take over our lives, and we need not let it have control of us. Financial stress has even been able to push pastors and church treasurers to take money from their own churches, which inevitably ruins their careers and isolates them from their community. The first chapter of Proverbs warns that such is the end of all who are greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. That is exactly what greed can do when it is not kept in check, by turning over our money woes to God and asking for God's help in our lives. And this wisdom from Proverbs happened to both the rich men we discussed today, as well as the fisherman's wife. Finally, the worst part about greed is that it corrodes our soul because it turns our focus toward me, myself, and I. Now, most of us have probably laughed when we heard a toddler or a really young kid say, mine, 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 mine. Everything they see is theirs. Yet there are many adults who still think in this same mind frame. And they still act in this self-centered, selfish way. So self-centeredness is one of the main symptoms of greed. Theologian Audrey West explains it this way, that greed is a problem primarily because its focus on the self keeps people from being rich toward God and rich toward others. The human propensity toward greed stands in striking contrast to God's providential care for rich and poor alike, as well as to the Lucan theme of appropriate stewardship of one's possessions. And I think she hits the nail on the head with that one. For us, an antidote to greed and greediness in our lives is generosity. When we are able to give to people in need a part, just a portion of what we have, then we are able to let go of the bonds that money and possessions sometimes hold on us. Proverbs 28:27 hit me particularly hard, as it states that those who give to the poor will have everything they need, but those who close their eyes to the poor will be under many curses.